Marcos woke up early, as he did every day. The first rays of sunlight were barely touching the horizon, but he could already feel the cool breeze that heralded the start of another serene morning. He dressed calmly and looked over to see Leo, his faithful canine companion, watching him with his tail wagging, ready for another walk. "Ready for another adventure, buddy?" Marcos asked with a laugh. Leo barked in response, jumping around his owner as if he already knew where they were going. The walks were the most anticipated moment of the day for both of them. With each step along the trails, surrounded by the silence of the forest and the calm of the hills, Marcos felt that his problems and the loneliness that had accompanied him since the loss of his wife seemed to dissipate. He found in nature and in Leo a peace that was hard to come by in the city. The branches crackled under his feet as he went deeper into the forest, and the smell of damp earth filled the air. Leo ran ahead, sniffing everything curiously and stopping at every new sound that came from between the trees. "Leo, this way," called Marcos, when he realized that the dog had wandered too far. But to his surprise, the dog didn't hear him. Leo seemed captured by something ahead, his ears erect and his gaze fixed on a shadow hidden by the dense vegetation. Marcos frowned, confused by the dog's behavior. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, coming closer. The forest was a sanctuary for Marcos, but something that day seemed out of the ordinary. He felt a slight chill and realized that, despite the beauty of the place, an uncomfortable silence hung over the forest. Leo remained motionless, staring in the direction of the cave that he himself had not yet noticed. And for the first time, Marcos began to suspect that something else was waiting for them in the forest. During the walk, Leo began to behave strangely. His ears perked up, and suddenly he shot off into the forest, running with unusual urgency. Marcos tried to call him, but the dog seemed deaf to his commands, as if something more powerful was attracting him. "Leo! Come back here, boy!" shouted Marcos, apprehensive. But Leo didn't stop. He ran towards the stranger, barking with an intensity that Marcos had never heard before. Reluctantly, Marcos hurried to follow him, feeling a strange mixture of curiosity and anxiety grow in his chest. The vegetation closed in around them, the shadows became denser, and the air seemed to cool as they moved further away from their usual path. Suddenly, he spotted Leo standing in front of an entrance hidden by vegetation, an opening in the rock covered by branches and leaves, barely visible. The dog stared into the darkness, as if there was something inside that he couldn't ignore. "But what?" muttered Marcos as he approached cautiously. He had no idea that this cave existed, even though he had been through the forest countless times. A chill ran down his spine. Sensing the tension in Leo, who was now growling low, he bent down and looked at the dog, trying to calm him down. "Calm down, kid. It's probably just an animal." But Leo didn't calm down. He remained tense, his eyes fixed on the dark entrance. Marcos looked into the cave, and a mixture of fear and fascination overwhelmed him. Instinct told him to turn around and get out of there, but curiosity was irresistible. "Right. Just a quick look," he muttered to himself, trying to convince himself. With his heart racing, he moved forward a few steps, while Leo stayed by his side, emitting little warning grunts. Marcos felt his heart beat faster as he entered the cave, the darkness almost palpable around him. He turned on the flashlight on his cell phone, and the beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing the narrowing rock walls shaped by time and nature. Leo, although hesitant, followed close behind, his footsteps echoing off the cave walls. Each step forward seemed longer than the last. He felt a tension in the air, as if the cave held ancient secrets, and the idea of venturing deeper stirred his instincts. But curiosity spoke louder. Finally, as he turned a narrow bend, Marcos spotted something unexpected. "What?" he muttered, his eyes widening as he saw the image in front of him. In the center of a small chamber illuminated only by the reflection of the light from his cell phone, a young woman with a pale face and tired eyes was sitting on the cold floor of the cave. In her arms, she held a baby who was sleeping soundly, wrapped in shabby blankets. The woman looked up when she saw Marcos, clearly frightened, as if she had been caught running away from something. Marcos stopped, surprised and not knowing what to say. "Girl, are you all right?" he asked, keeping his voice low, trying to sound as unthreatening as possible. The young woman held the baby tighter, hesitating to answer, but her eyes, filled with a mixture of mistrust and despair, locked onto Marcos's. "Please don't hurt us," she whispered, her voice weak. Marcos raised a hand in a gesture of peace. "Calm down. I'm not going to hurt you. I was just walking with my dog, and I saw the entrance to the cave. I didn't know anyone was in here," he explained, trying to calm her down. Gradually, the young woman's expression softened, although her eyes still showed fear. Leo, sensing the tension dissipating, approached her slowly, sniffing the air near her, as if to make sure she was safe. The baby, sensing the movement, let out a soft sigh, but continued sleeping. "My name is Marcos," he said, breaking the silence. "And this is Leo. How did you end up here?" The woman lowered her gaze, stroking the baby carefully before answering. "I'm Laura, and this is my daughter, Anna. We have nowhere else to go." The chamber in the cave was shrouded in a heavy silence, as Marcos processed the presence of Laura and the baby in such an inhospitable place. The cold intensified and the wind whistled at the entrance, accentuating the urgency to understand what had led that young mother to live there. Laura took a deep breath, her eyes still wary, but a faintness on her face indicated that helplessness spoke louder than fear. She looked down at the baby, lightly stroking Anna's tiny hair, and began to speak in a trembling voice. "I had nowhere else to go," she began, her voice choppy. "I lost my job a few months ago, and with no family to support me, I also lost the apartment I lived in. I tried everything, Marcos, but nothing seemed to work." Marcos listened intently, his eyes fixed on the frail figure in front of him. She continued, oscillating between pain and relief at finally being able to share her story. "I even slept in the street, but people looked at me, at both of us, as if we were invisible or a threat. So when I discovered this cave, I thought it would at least be a shelter from the cold and the stairs. But," she swallowed, "I was wrong. This place is too cold for Anna, and winter has only just begun." Marcos felt a tightness in his chest. The loneliness and tiredness marked on Laura's face revealed a silent, invisible struggle, waged away from the eyes of the world. He looked at the baby, who was sleeping serenely, oblivious to the suffering his mother was carrying. "You can't stay here," said Marcos, his voice firm but full of compassion. "This place is dangerous, especially with winter coming." He looked around, noticing the damp on the walls and the rough floor where she slept. "There must be another way out." Laura lowered her head, a resigned sigh escaping her lips. "I know. But where else would I go? They don't give shelters to mothers with small babies, and I don't know what else to do." Silence fell over them as Marcos pondered. Laura's words reverberated in his mind, bringing up a sense of responsibility that he couldn't ignore. "We're going to fix this," he said, determined. "You're not staying here. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to help you." Marcos could hardly take his eyes off Laura and the baby. Her face, marked by tiredness and sadness, seemed to hide years of struggle in such a short space of time. Little Anna slept peacefully in his arms, oblivious to the harshness of life that surrounded them. The image of the two of them in such fragility struck Marcos unexpectedly. He took a deep breath, feeling an unusual determination grow in his chest. He couldn't just leave that mother and her daughter there, helpless and hopeless. "Laura, I'm going to help you." The decision came out of his mouth before he even processed what he was saying, but he knew it was the only thing to do. Laura looked up, visibly surprised. "Help? But how?" she murmured, her voice trembling in disbelief. "I don't know exactly how yet, but we'll find a way. I can't leave them here in this place," he replied, looking around at the cold, damp cave. "First, I'll go back to town and see what I can find. I'll bring you something to eat and some warm clothes for you and Anna." Laura nodded slowly, unsure whether this was a dream or reality. No one had reached out to her since she had lost everything. She hugged Anna tighter, as if to protect her from a hope that seemed too great. "Thank you, Marcos. I don't know what to say," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. "You don't have to say anything now. We'll do it together. And while I'm not back, stay inside. Don't go out into the forest, okay? It's going to get colder soon, and I don't want you to risk it." He stood up, taking one last look in the direction of Laura and the baby. He felt that somehow, something connected him to that woman he barely knew, and that helpless child. Leo, faithful and attentive, sniffed the air one last time before following Marcos towards the cave exit. As he turned, he took one last look at Laura, trying to give her the reassurance she needed. And then, with firm steps and a heavy heart, Marcos set off towards the city, determined to make a difference in Laura and Anna's lives. The days that followed Marcos's first help were intense and challenging. At first, Laura could hardly believe the genuineness of that unknown man's gesture. He showed up every day carrying bags of clothes, food, and even some toys for Anna. With each encounter, Laura felt her heart softening, her mistrust giving way to a feeling of relief and gratitude. One morning, Marcos showed up with news that surprised Laura. "I got an appointment with a social worker. She's going to assess your situation and see what we can do," he said excitedly. Laura, although grateful, was anxious. The idea of telling her story to someone other than Marcos, of opening her wounds and accepting official help, made her nervous. What if they separate me from Anna?" she asked, her voice hesitant, clutching the little girl to her chest. Marcos moved closer, bending down to her height. "I wouldn't let that happen, Laura. We're in this together. Trust me, okay?" She nodded, watching his firm, determined gaze. It was clear that Marcos was not only offering material help, but was also emotionally committed to her situation. There was a sincerity in every gesture, and Laura began to feel that she could finally trust someone. Over the weeks, the relationship between the three of them grew closer. Laura began to smile at Marcos, shy gestures, but full of gratitude. Small moments between them were filled with a comfortable silence, where the noise of the city or the sound of Anna crying seemed far away. Leo also became attached to Laura and Anna, always on guard, a watchful and welcoming gaze. Finally, after days of conversations, visits to the social worker and forms, Laura received the news that would change her fate. "I've got you a temporary shelter in a safe place," said Marcos, with a restrained smile, visibly moved. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. I can't thank you enough, Marcos. You were everything that Anna and I needed." Marcos held her hand in a firm, affectionate gesture. "No need to thank me. You deserve this chance." Months later, Laura and Anna's lives looked different. With Marcos's support and the help of social services, Laura got a small, cozy apartment. She now worked in a local market, where the hours were long but the atmosphere was welcoming. Anna, with her infectious laughter and incessant curiosity, brightened her mother's day, and the two of them lived in the tranquility that had once seemed like a distant dream. One afternoon, while Laura was organizing Anna's toys in the small bedroom, she heard a familiar knock on the door. When she opened it, she found Marcos, with Leo by his side and a warm smile. "I've brought you a surprise," he announced, revealing a simple package, carefully decorated with a blue bow. "What's this, Marcos?" Laura asked, laughing and curious, taking the package. "Open it and see," he replied, while Anna, now excited, tried to pull the package out of her mother's hands. Inside the package, there was a small wooden sculpture of a cave, precisely detailed, and inside it, two tiny figures, a woman holding a baby. Laura touched the sculpture, feeling the texture of the wood under her fingers, and a wave of emotion washed over her. The cave, which had once been a place of despair and loneliness, now symbolized the rebirth and compassion that had brought them together. It's beautiful," she murmured, her eyes watering. "Thank you, Marcos. That means a lot to me." Marcos smiled, looking at her with the affection of someone who knew the weight of the journey Laura had been through. "I wanted you to have something to remember. The past isn't always easy to face, but it's part of who we become, isn't it?" Laura nodded, clutching the sculpture to her chest, while Anna, with her usual energy, was already playing with Leo. Looking at that little piece of wood that told the story of her rebirth, she felt that for the first time, she had a safe home. "You're part of it too, Marcos," she said, touched. "Without you, none of this would be possible. You gave us a home, a chance. And you gave me a purpose," he replied softly. "Believe me, this friendship has transformed my life too." As the sun set, casting a golden light over the apartment, the three of them stood together in a silence full of gratitude and understanding. The cave that had once been a refuge from fear now symbolized hope and new possibilities, a legacy shared forever between Marcos, Laura, and little Anna.